John Key is on something of a delicate mission of diplomacy in Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister has been at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting there, sharing drinks with David Cameron and Tony Abbott. He's also shoring up support for New Zealand to take a seat on the very powerful UN Security Council for 2015. But plenty of others are focusing their attentions on accusations of war crimes and human rights violations in Sri Lanka. Professor of International Relations Robert Patman is here to untangle that mess. Well, a very good evening. Well, thank you so very much for coming. CHOGM, what happens at these CHOGM meetings?
Well, these are biannual meetings of all members of the Commonwealth. There's 53 member states in the Commonwealth. And these countries mostly have a historical association with the old empire led by Britain. What sort of issues do they consider? Well, in the past, CHOGM's been used to consider issues like the problem of apartheid in South Africa, military coups in member states like Fiji, and electoral fraud in other countries within the Commonwealth. So it covers a range of issues. It's quite a useful forum because it's one of the few international organisations which is not led by the United States. So it's a non-American international organisation.
That's very good. Now, John Key's going to be bringing his own agenda to this board here, but the background of the human rights abuses in Sri Lanka has certainly coloured the waters here.
Yeah, I mean, there's two strands to this, Craig. Firstly, the circumstances in which the civil war in Sri Lanka, which went on for 25 years, ended in 2009 under the present leader, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa. There's a suggestion that he was extremely ruthless in ending the civil war, but that made him quite domestically popular, actually, because it was a terrible civil war between the majority Sinhalese group and the Tamils, and beheadings and suicide bombings. That was brought to an end, but in quite brutal circumstances.
It's certainly been a very bloody conclusion to a bloody conflict.
Yes, and in addition, there's been criticisms that the government there, led by Mr. Rajapaksa, has done not enough to promote reconciliation after the civil war.
New Zealand's position on this, what is your take on this? Should we boycott or should we engage? There's a lot at stake here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can, just say one or the other, actually, because sometimes, depending on the circumstances, what I call constructive engagement may play dividends. That is to say, a country like Sri Lanka, which is recovering from a traumatic civil war, it will perhaps be unrealistic to expect it to become immediately, at the end of the civil war, a tolerant society with none of the grievances which have occurred in the recent past being remembered. So I think John Key's tried to strike a middle road position where he's saying we're engaging, but we're serving notice to Rajapaksa and his government that we expect improvements in the future. Now, opponents will say that that's not good enough. We should be true to the ideals that we hold as New Zealand and as Kiwis. We should be more robust on these issues.
Because politically this is kind of delicate because we are vying for one of the few seats on the UN Security Council for 2015.
Well, that's right, Craig. I think there's two big issues here that possibly tilted John Key's position towards moderation on the human rights front. One was the Security Council, which you mentioned, but the other one is our quite productive trade relationship with Sri Lanka. We get more than $200 million in exports, largely for dairy products, and indeed Mr. McCulley, the Foreign Minister, just concluded a dairy cooperation agreement while he was in Sri Lanka at CHOGM. So, and we're also in the process of constructing or developing another dairy facility in the troubled north of the country. Right. So, yeah.
Right, so all that aside, we've been offered an elephant by Sri Lanka.
Two, I believe.
What do we do with that? How do we interpret that?
I think it's a gesture of gratitude by the Sri Lankan government. The two countries do have quite a close trade relationship, although it's had its hiccups early in the year. For example, there was some concern about Fonterra's position. Yes. But I think it's, if you like, a symbol that Sri Lanka is the relations are good between the two countries. And I think, John Key, I think, would only be embarrassed if the relationship soured in the near future.
Well, we'd still end up with an elephant. Professor of International Relations, Robert Patman, thank you so very much for coming in.